Today I'm going to talk about meeting the interviewees at their digital home turf, as we've called it. The topic of my PhD is digitalization of illegal drug markets. So it's kind of online drug dealers. I started in the area of darknet, but I moved more toward the social media and the use of Facebook, Instagram, and the more normal media to deal drugs. So I look into how this use of the digital tools have kind of changed how people trust each other and what's the basic of trusts. And I'm also interested in more the marketing part, which is now a new challenge for the drug dealers. So in my project, I mainly use qualitative methods, such as ethnography and interviewing, and also some social network research. So before I started my PhD, I was part of a project where we researched the social media drug dealing. So that's what I'm going to talk mostly about today, was how we actually interviewed people using digital tools. So the project that I mentioned is called Nordic Drug Dealing on Social Media. So we interviewed people and we did digital ethnography in all the 5 Nordic countries. There hasn't really been, or there hadn't been at that point in 2017, any research on social media use for dealing drugs. So we asked quite open questions, like where does it take place? How does it take place? Why do they use social media? And also how do they perceive the risks of using, for example, Facebook compared to darknet, which is where they use a lot of encryption and they're safer, they're more anonymous. They don't meet anyone face to face, whereas in social media they actually meet and they exchange drugs and money. So for the project, we started off with phase 1 using digital ethnography. So we had, in all those 5 countries, even though we have similar languages, it can be quite different, especially when it comes to drugs, because there's so many nicknames for drugs that, for me, I'm Norwegian, studying in Denmark, so Norwegian and Denmark is kind of, or Danish is kind of fine, but Swedish, when it comes to drug words, it's even hard for Swedish people, I think, who are not in the drug society, let's say. So what we did in the digital and phase 1 was that we searched and we lurked. That's a whole ethical discussion if that's okay or not. But in such a field, it's necessary in some ways to actually just to explore what's going on. So we just searched in the different social media, also other medias than this. So some of them, as you can probably imagine, is more easy to search in, for example, Facebook, than Snapchat, for example. We tried to search around different search words for related to drugs. So in phase 2, we did semi-structured interviews. So we had textual-based interviews through the app called Wicker. So the aim was to get more information about how social media was used, and not only the open social media that we got in the first phase, but also the more closed, such as Snapchat and other one-on-one tools. So today's focus is on the semi-structured interviews that we did on Wicker. So what we did was that we, just short before I go into the more methods, was that we contacted people under Wicker. We sent them a message saying that we're from the University of Copenhagen. We would like to do an interview with you, or we can see that you're active in online drug markets, so we want to talk to you about that. So some of the things what makes these interviews different than face-to-face interviews is that they're textually based. They're anonymous, so we never knew I don't know who I've talked to on the other side. And they're also asynchronous and synchronous, so they take place at the same time as you're talking to them, such as in face-to-face, but they also take place across time. And there are also some practical issues that we met along the way, because we didn't find any literature on this way of doing interviews. So you have email interviews, Skype interviews, but not really how flexible it is to use applications and textual interviews. So since we didn't really find any literature, I decided to do this into an article. So I actually used data to research how it was using these methods. So one part is the interview data and notes. So I coded this all in NVivo for methods to look at where there were interesting things happening in the interviews that were interesting for discussing the methods that we used. We also had Slack. Slack is an application. We had Slack discussions with the project members. So as I said, we had 15 students in all the 5 countries collecting data on their native languages. So that was a way for us to actually talk together, even though we weren't in the same space. We also did focus groups with the project members. And yeah, as I said, 12 students from 5 countries. They all had they were students, so they knew some of the research methods and they could kind of reflect more about that. And I was the research assistant at that point. So do any of you know Wicker? No? None of you know Wicker? No. So Wicker is, you might know Telegram and Signal, so it's quite similar to those two, except that for Wicker you don't need your phone number. So you log in, so you create a username and you create a password. Whereas on Telegram and Signal you use your phone number to log in. So it's less anonymous in that way because you have to connect it to a phone number. It's also time-set messages, so it kind of works like Snapchat, but you can decide for how long the messages will be showing for the recipient. So you can time it to, I don't know, I think even 1 minute to maybe 6 days or a week. So you're in control of how long they're seeing the messages. And if you ask Wicker, the company, they also explain a lot that they're very secure, nothing will be shared, it's fully encrypted, and privacy is for everyone. So that's really important for Wicker. So what was great about that was that we trusted it as researchers, but also the participant trusted it. So the reason why we chose Wicker, you can see in this slide. So you can see that these are fake or semi-fake. I've kind of translated them into English, so none of it is traceable back to the dealers. But you can see here that they use Wicker here, for example. So they write Wicker and then they write their contact information on Wicker, so it's a way to contact them further. So they kind of use, in this case, Facebook on the left and Instagram on the right. So they use these medias to market themselves, kind of, just to put their names out there and people contact them on Wicker. So that made it a very nice way for us to contact them as well. So we knew that they felt Wicker was a secure space to talk about drugs, then we felt we can also contact them on Wicker. So the interviewees, also good that the interviewees know the application, so we didn't have to ask them, can you download Wicker so we can do the interview there, because they already used it. And they trusted it, and it protected both the researcher and the interviewee. Because sending 15 students out to research drug dealers is not really, it wouldn't feel safe for us or for them. So that's also a reason for why we asked them to use Wicker. But then I get to the interview challenges. So there were a lot of positive sides of using Wicker for interviewing. But at the same time, we met a lot of challenges, which is what I'm going to talk mostly about, the interview challenges, and also some ways that we chose to solve them in our project. So some of the known challenges for textual interviews is like emotions and expressions. You don't get that through textual interviews. It's also easy to misunderstand what the person is saying, or also you can misunderstand what that person thought you were saying. So there's so many layers of misunderstanding that might be easier to pick up in a face-to-face interview. It's also the thing about being in the same or interviewing at the same time or across time that can be quite a challenge or something that you have to think about, and also others. But in addition to these kind of known challenges, we met some others. So the first challenge we met was time. So we expected the interviews to be about 1 to 2 hours in written per interview. But what we experienced, what the reality was, it was between half an hour and 2 months. So it really expanded over a long time, but the interview on 2 months, it was a good interview, it just took time. So this is a quote from one of the interviews. So the researcher or the interviewee says, "Sorry that it took so long to answer. No problem. Could you tell me a bit more about the first buying and selling? Did you prepare in any ways? Any precautions or something like that?" Then it took 2 days. So the researcher asks again, "Hi, are you still interested in participating?" "Hi, yes, sorry, I totally forgot about this." And then it was maybe half an hour intensively interviewing. So another challenge is the researcher flexibility. So as was asked to Jamie, it kind of relates to the question you got towards the end. So how much should the research affect us in our private lives as well? Because the problem about researching the digital life, like when I do digital ethnography, as I'm doing at the moment, I can do that at all times. So I can be when I'm lying in bed before going to sleep, I can do some ethnography. Like it's always available, which is good, but it can also be challenging. So should we be available for interviews 24/7? Because suddenly they respond at midnight or at 3 in the morning or 7 in the morning. You never know. And a lot of the interviewing took place at night and afternoon because that's when they got home from work. Like talking about drugs, dealing drugs, and having a proper job, it's probably not the topic you want to talk about on your phone while at work, for example. And I also experienced the interviewing multiple at the same time. So you probably know that you don't want to lose the interviewees either. You want to get as many as possible. So when you have 5 people at the same time wanting to be interviewed, it works, but it takes a lot of time as well. And it can be quite challenging. So what we chose to solve some of these was that we had a shorter intensive period of data collection. So we only used 2 months or 3 months to collect the data. So we had a shorter amount of time so that we knew that, okay, it's like doing a field work in some ways, that you know for those 2 months, you'll be occupied. Like my husband, for example, he knew, okay, for dinner, well, I just got a message, so I'll just answer that quickly. And it's also important to prepare the students because, as Jamie said, as PhD student, your whole life or your PhD is your whole life. So you're fine with answering whenever, but our students really weren't. So it's something to have in mind if you're engaging students in this. And it's also important to keep notes, even though you might take screenshots of the conversations. That's how we documented the interviews, and the interviewees knew that we were doing that to write it down. But it's also important to keep notes, because when I was interviewing 5 people at the same time, I needed to keep or separate them from each other. So to keep note while waiting for answers. And it's also something that, I don't mention it here, but something about following the flow as well. Answering at the flow of the interviewee, because as a researcher, you want to keep them there. You want to keep them on the hook. Like when they answer, you answer quickly, and then they might wait again. So it's something about, just think about how you answer your friends or just a regular conversation. Yeah, so think about the rhythm of the communication, because we felt like we were kind of pushing them too hard sometimes, answering right away, and they might forget it by the time they could answer. So the third challenge was that we didn't have any control of the interview context or the state that the interviewee was in. So we expected, by using this application, we expected that it was easier for people to participate, but in some ways we found out that it was too easy for them to participate. So many of them were not at home on their couch. So some of them were at work. Yeah, thank you. Some of them were at work. I interviewed one who's late Friday night, who suddenly said, "I'm too drunk, let's take it tomorrow." And I'm like, "Oh, you're drunk?" Like, I didn't know, because we were just talking. And some of them might be with friends who influence their answers. And there can also be technical difficulties, which we didn't really think about. So here the research says, okay, then I have another question. Have you experienced an increased sales by using social media? If so, how much? Nope, no one has ever tried to mess with my sales in any way. I mean, do you earn more money through sales on social media compared to sales before social media? Not a rise of threats, but a rise of sales and money. Oh, sorry, my screen is broken. I thought it said rat, like to rat out. I can tell it says increase now. Yes, social media is a big part of my sales today. So there are these things that you can't control. You don't know. So the fourth challenge was researcher anonymity. So as I said, the students, they use pseudonyms. We also used a separate phone. So they were all given a phone with a SIM card, and they were given identities to use, or anonymous identities to use on the different social media. That was so that, like, when you're sitting in a meeting or something, you don't get a lot of notifications of new drugs available in this area, for example. So me and the project leader, we were public. So we had a website, and we were also public on discussion forums. So I posted on some discussions forums saying that my name is Silje, I'm from the University of Copenhagen. We want to talk to people who blah, blah, blah. So we chose to be public about it. But then how do you verify yourself as a researcher to gain trust? So I did interact with them using my name on different forums, but how could they know that it's actually me? Because some of these people are quite nervous, like they're quite hesitant towards talking to you. So they want to make sure that you are the person you say you are. So one way to do that is to use an encrypted messaging code in some ways, a personal code, so you can give them the key to open the code, which gets quite technical, too technical for me as well. So that's not, like, I wouldn't feel safe, and I think that also limits the people you interview because they have to feel safe with that as well. So the one solutions we gave to the one person I was wanting to interview who was very hesitant, he chose to contact me through the university website, asking me a question. He asked me, I think, what color has a banana? And I then answered on the forum, yellow. So he knew in that way somehow that I was the person. The fifth challenge, participant anonymity. So it was good in some ways because they talked openly about the drug business and how they bought drugs. So it was quite easy to get participants. We did ask a lot of people, and a lot of people turned us down. But I had some very good conversations with dealers who I probably wouldn't have had face-to-face. But how can you then be sure that you don't interview the same person twice? So at one instance, I had around 10 Norwegians contacting me at the same time wanting to be interviewed, and I thought that was a bit too good to be true, that many people were ready to talk to me. So I became a bit skeptical. Even though they used different usernames, I was a bit skeptical towards who they were. So I started asking them some questions before, because we did give them a gift card of like £25, I think. So some of them were interested because of that. So I started asking, do you buy or sell? And which social media platforms do you use for buying and selling? So after asking that, I was still unsure of some of them. So I then asked them a bit more information, like why did you get into it? And I told them that we're afraid that some of you are the same person. So we just want to make sure that we're not interviewing the same person more times. So I asked them to give an in-depth explanation about how you started buying drugs or selling drugs. So kind of to limit the ones that weren't that interested as well, or to limit the ones, if it was the same person, I thought if he makes 10 stories that are separate, then that's impressive. Like yeah. So that was the way we tried, how we tried to solve it. So just to sum up the conclusions, so encrypted messaging applications, it's a good way to talk to hard to read populations. And it works well as a platform to communicate about illegal actions. And it was good to use an application that is safe and that the participants trust. And a lot of these people were young, as well, quite young. Like, I think the mean age was about 23 or 24, so they know how to communicate on these platforms. So I think that's also important that young people today, they communicate through text, they communicate through apps. So why not use that? Like, even though it might be strange for us as researchers, they're used to talking that way. But then on the other side, it's how to deal with the challenges of time and space and anonymity. And these things can also affect data reliability. So I think it's very important with like conferences like this or seminars like this, where you can actually talk about methods and ethics. And it's important to talk about the challenges you meet as well, and to reflect around that and not only talk about the positives.